She was lying on the cold pavement, rain soaking through her thin jacket, her wheelchair overturned beside her, and three men standing over her laughing. That is where our story begins. Not in a hospital room, not in a warm home, not in a moment of peace, but in the worst night of Margaret Calloway's life, a night she was certain would be her last. And if a stranger named Daniel Reeves hadn't taken a wrong turn on his way home from a night shift, if his 7-year-old daughter hadn't been sitting in the back seat asking why he looked so tired, if the streetlight above that alley hadn't flickered at exactly the right moment, then none of what I'm about to tell you would have ever happened. But here's the thing about fate. It doesn't knock politely. It doesn't send you a calendar invitation. It crashes into your life like a freight train at 2 a.m, and it leaves you standing in the wreckage wondering if you were always meant to be exactly there, at exactly that moment, making exactly that choice. So stay with me, because this story is going to take you somewhere you didn't expect to go today. And I promise you, by the time we reach the end, you will never look at a stranger the same way again. Margaret Calloway was 34 years old, and she had not always been in a wheelchair. There was a time, not so long ago, when she ran. Not jogged, not walked briskly, she actually ran. She had been a high school cross-country coach in a small town in western Pennsylvania called Harlow Creek, a place with 2 traffic lights, a diner that served the best apple pie in the county, and a community that genuinely believed, in looking after its own. She had grown up there, gone to college on a partial scholarship, come back because she loved those hills and those kids and that diner and the way the fog settled into the valley every morning like the land itself was exhaling. She had never been rich. Teachers rarely are. But she had been content. And if you had asked Margaret at 31 what she needed to be happy, she would have told you. A good cup of coffee before dawn, a team of girls who believed in themselves a little more each week, and the sound of her own feet hitting the trail behind her house at 6 in the morning. Then came the accident. It was not dramatic in the way accidents in movies are dramatic. There was no slow motion. There was no soaring music. There was just a patch of black ice on Route 9 in November, a delivery truck that crossed the center line, and a collision so sudden and complete that Margaret didn't even have time to be afraid. She woke up in a hospital bed 4 days later with her sister holding her hand, and the first thing she noticed before the pain, before the confusion, before the grief, was the stillness in her legs. They were there. She could see them under the blanket. But they were quiet in a way that the rest of her body was not, and somewhere in the fog of painkillers and fluorescent light, she understood what that stillness meant. The doctors used words like complete spinal cord injury in T6 level and permanent paralysis from a mid-chest down. Her sister, Clara, squeezed her hand so hard that Margaret's knuckles went white. And Margaret, who had always been the steady one, the one who stayed calm when her runner stumbled and fell, the one who said, "Get up, shake it off, keep moving," Margaret lay in that hospital bed and said nothing at all. For 3 days she said nothing. She just looked at the ceiling and breathed and tried to understand how a person was supposed to rebuild a life out of something that had been so completely shattered. What the doctors couldn't prepare her for, what no one could really prepare her for, was a world outside the hospital. She had known, in an abstract way, that life in a wheelchair would be different. What she hadn't known was how different the people around her would become. Some of them became unbearably kind, hovering and helping before she had even asked, speaking to her slowly as though the injury to her spine had somehow affected her mind. Others became distant, uncomfortable in the presence of her disability, as though it were contagious or as though they simply didn't know the right words and so chose to say nothing at all. Her school was legally required to make accommodations, but the principal suggested gently that perhaps coaching cross-country was no longer the right fit, and before the end of the school year, she was reassigned to a desk position in the athletic department, organizing schedules and ordering supplies, work that was fine but felt like being handed a map to a country she no longer lived in. She moved from Harlow Creek after the second year. The hills she had loved made navigation impossible. The house she had rented had 3 steps up to the front door that the landlord kept promising to address and never did. The grocery store had narrow aisles that her wheelchair barely fit through. The town she had chosen because she loved it had been built, she slowly understood, for a version of herself that no longer existed. She moved to the city, Pittsburgh, because it was close enough to still feel like home, but large enough to offer the accessible housing and public transit and medical infrastructure she now needed. She found a ground-floor apartment in a neighborhood called Greenfield, modest but manageable, close to a bus line. She found a new job doing remote administrative work for a nonprofit. She found a routine. She found a way to keep living, which is not the same as a way to be happy, but in those early years it felt like enough. The city was harder than she had imagined in different ways, and the town had been hard. The curb cuts were inconsistent. The bus drivers were not always patient. The sidewalks were cracked and uneven in ways that sent her chair lurching. She had learned to plan every outing like a military operation, checking routes in advance, calling ahead to confirm accessibility, carrying a small toolkit for basic wheelchair repairs because she had been stranded twice waiting for help that was slow to arrive. She had also learned that there were people in the world who were cruel in ways she had never anticipated. Not the big dramatic cruelty of movies and news stories, but small, grinding cruelty. People who parked in accessible spaces and shrugged when she pointed at the sign. People on the bus who refused to move from the designated wheelchair area and looked at her with a boredom that was somehow worse than hostility. Men sometimes who looked at her in public as though her disability had stripped her of personhood entirely, as though she were an inconvenience to be navigated around rather than a human being to be acknowledged. She had filed complaints. She had learned to speak up. She had found a community of other disabled people online and in person who understood in a way that only people with shared experience can understand. She had done all the right things. She had been, by any reasonable measure, resilient. And then came the night everything fell apart. It was a Thursday in October, and Margaret had been to a support group meeting that ran later than usual. The meeting was held in a community center about 6 blocks from her apartment, a route she had traveled dozens of times. She was heading home along Greenfield Avenue, moving under the pools of streetlight, the October air cold and carrying the smell of wood smoke and wet leaves. She was tired in a good way, the way you are when you've said true things out loud and been heard. She noticed them when she turned onto Mercer Street. 3 men, late 20s or early 30s, standing outside a bar that had recently opened and was already developing a reputation. She had learned to read situations quickly, one of the survival skills she had developed in the city, and something about their posture, about the way they went quiet when they saw her, made her want to cross the street. But the opposite curb had no cut, a fact she had reported to the city 3 times without response, and so she kept her side and kept moving. "Hey!" One of them stepped off the curb toward her. "Where you going?" She didn't answer. Eyes forward. "Keep moving." "Hey, I'm talking to you." "Closer now." "What's wrong? Can't you hear me?" The other 2 laughed. One of them said something she didn't catch. She was moving faster now, pushing hard, her breath coming short, and she could hear footsteps behind her and then beside her, and then one of them stepped directly in front of her wheelchair, and she hit the footrest, and the chair lurched, and she grabbed the wheels to stop herself from going over. "Watch it," he said, as though she had run into him deliberately. "Please leave me alone," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that, later, that her voice was steady. "Why? You got somewhere to be?" He put his hands on the handles of her wheelchair. She felt it immediately. The unwanted contact with her chair, which is an extension of your body when you use one, an intimate violation she had experienced before and never gotten used to. "Don't touch my chair," she said. He laughed and gave it a small push, not violent, but deliberate, a demonstration of how easily he could. "Relax," he said. "I'm just being friendly." What happened in the next 30 seconds happened too fast and too slow at the same time, which is how violence usually works. One of the others said something. There was laughter. There was a push. And then Margaret was on the cold pavement. The wheelchair overturned beside her. Rain that started at some point without her noticing soaking through her jacket. The side of her head ringing where it had hit the ground. Her hand scraped raw against the asphalt. "Don't hurt me," she heard herself say. The words came out ragged and small, nothing like her actual voice. "Please, don't hurt me. I can't walk. This is the moment. This is the moment I need you to hold on to, because everything that follows, every act of kindness, every miracle of human connection, every turn of the story that will make you catch your breath, everything grows from this single, Terrible moment of a woman lying on wet pavement in the dark, saying the most frightening words she had ever said out loud. Because here's the thing about being at your lowest point. Here's the thing no one tells you when you are there. Your lowest point is not the end. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, in a specific and unrepeatable way that life occasionally arranges itself. Your lowest point is the exact place where someone else's story was always going to intersect with yours. Daniel Reeves was 38 years old and exhausted in a particular way that single fathers who work night shifts and still try to be good fathers are exhausted, which is to say, he was exhausted down to the cellular level, in his bones, in the place behind his eyes that never quite stopped aching. He had taken a night shift at the water treatment plant 4 years ago because it paid 40 cents more per hour, and 40 cents per hour across a year adds up to a real number when you are raising a child alone, and the math of single parenthood requires that kind of calculation constantly. His daughter, Lily, was 7 years old and was sitting in the back seat of his 10-year-old Honda Civic because he had picked her up from his neighbor Mrs. Patterson's house, where Lily stayed on the nights he worked. And it was past midnight, and Lily should have been asleep, but she never slept on the drive home. She always stayed awake talking. And Daniel had learned to treasure those drives even on the nights he could barely keep his eyes open, because those were sometimes the best. Conversations he had. "Dad," Lily said, as they crossed into Greenfield. "Yeah, Bug. Do you think fish know they're in water?" Daniel glanced in the rear-view mirror. Her face was serious in the way children's faces are serious when they're asking something they've been thinking about for a long time. "I don't know," he said. "Probably not. It's all they've ever known. Like how we don't think about air." Exactly like that. So something could be completely around you all the time, and you might not even know it. "What are you thinking about, Lily?" She was quiet for a moment. "Love," she said simply, and then looked out the window. Daniel almost missed a turn onto Mercer Street because his eyes were stinging, and he was thinking about what his 7-year-old had just said about love being invisible like water or air, and he took the turn late and had to correct his steering, and that correction brought him down Mercer Street instead of his usual route down Haverford, and his headlights swept across the scene. He saw the overturned wheelchair first, then the 3 men, then Margaret on the ground. He didn't make a conscious decision. He didn't think it through. He pulled over so hard the tires scraped the curb, put the car in park, without fully processing that he was doing it, and was out of the car before the engine had finished shuddering to a stop. "Hey!" His voice came out louder than he intended. "Hey! Back up!" The 3 men turned. They were surprised he could see it, and that surprise was the first and most important advantage he had. He was not an imposing man. He was 5'10" average build, wearing a city worker's jacket that was faded from years of use. He was not threatening, but he was loud and he was moving fast, and he was placing himself between them and Margaret without stopping to consider whether this was a good idea, which perhaps it wasn't. But it was the only idea he had. "What are you doing?" one of the men said. "I'm calling the police," Daniel said. He had his phone out. He was already dialing. "Right now, while we're talking. So if you want to be here when they arrive, stay." He hit send. The line connected. He didn't say anything into the phone yet, just held it out, so they could hear the operator's voice saying, "Pittsburgh Police. What's your emergency?" The 3 men exchanged glances. One of them said something under his breath. And then, the way cowards always do when the calculation changes, they left, not running. That would be admitting too much, but walking quickly, heads down, turning the corner and disappearing. Daniel put the phone to his ear. "I need to report an assault on Mercer Street in Greenfield. A woman in a wheelchair. Please send someone." He crouched down. Margaret was trying to push herself up, her palms flat on the wet pavement, her jaw set with a ferocity that he recognized as the kind of determination that lives just on the other side of terror. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey, I've got you. Help is coming. My name is Daniel. You're safe." She looked at him. Her eyes were dark and fierce, and full of something he couldn't immediately name. Later he would understand that what he was seeing was not fear and not anger, but rather the specific exhaustion of someone who has had to fight for their dignity so many times that they have become both very strong and very tired. "My chair," she said. "I'll get it. Can you tell me if you're hurt? Are you hurt anywhere?" "I hit my head. I'm okay. Just get my chair." He stood and righted the wheelchair carefully, checked it the way you check a bicycle for damage after a fall, run his hands along the frame, testing the wheels. One of the armrests was scraped, but everything seemed intact. He brought it close to her, set the brakes the way he had seen people do in some distant memory, and then asked, "Can you get in or do you need help?" She looked at him again with that same fierce assessment, measuring him. "I can do it," she said. "Just make sure the chair doesn't move." He held it steady while she pushed herself up from the pavement in a process that clearly required enormous upper body strength and absolute precision, and he did not help beyond holding the chair still, because she had not asked him to help, and he understood intuitively that she had not asked because she did not want him to, and that respecting that was the most important thing he could do in this moment. When she was in the chair, she sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and breathed. Her palms were bleeding. Rain fell steadily. Daniel took off his jacket, without thinking, and held it out to her. She looked at it. "You'll get cold." "I run hot," he lied. She took the jacket. "Dad." They both turned. Lily was standing beside the car in her pajamas and rubber boots, which she had apparently put on herself at some point, and which were on the wrong feet. Her face was solemn and wondering, taking in the overturned scene with the quiet seriousness of a child who understands more than she should have to. "Lily," Daniel said, "get back in the car." "Is she okay?" Lily asked. Margaret looked at the child. Something shifted in her face. "I'm okay," she said. "Your hands are bleeding," Lily said. "They'll heal." Lily considered this with the gravity of a scientist evaluating a hypothesis. Then she went back to the car, opened her backpack on the back seat, and came back with a travel-sized pack of wet wipes and a Band-Aid featuring a cartoon dinosaur. She held them out to Margaret with both hands, the way children offer gifts completely and without reservation. Margaret stared at the Band-Aid for a long moment. Then she took it. "Thank you," she said, and her voice had changed, not broken. Nothing as simple as that, but change in a way that a held breath changes when you finally let it go. "I'm Lily," the child said. "I'm Margaret." "That's a pretty name." "Like the flower?" "Like the flower," Margaret agreed. The police arrived in 11 minutes. A patrol car, 2 officers, one of whom took Daniel's statement, and one of whom crouched at Margaret's eye level and spoke to her with professional gentleness about what had happened and what she wanted to do. She gave descriptions. She said she wanted to file a report. She was clear and precise and matter-of-fact in a way that the officers seemed to respect. Daniel waited nearby, his jacket now around Margaret's shoulders. Lily buckled back into her car seat, but watching everything through the window with those serious eyes. When the officers left, Margaret sat for a moment in the rain-dampened quiet. Daniel stood a few feet away, not crowding her, giving her space. "You live nearby?" he asked. 6 blocks. Would you let me walk with you? I'll stay back if you want. I just don't want you going alone." She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he thought she was going to say no, that she had good reasons for saying no, that a stranger in the dark was a stranger in the dark regardless of what he had or hadn't done. "Okay," she said. He pushed Lily's car slowly alongside her as she rolled, Lily watching through the window until she fell asleep somewhere in the 3rd block, her cheek pressed to the glass and her rubber boots still on the wrong feet. They didn't talk much. The rain softened. The streetlights made everything look like it was underwater. When they reached her building, she stopped outside the door. "Thank you," she said. "Both of you. You don't have to thank me. I know I don't have to." She looked at him directly. "I want to." He nodded. He started to go. "Daniel." He turned. "The little girl," she said. "She has good instincts." He smiled. It was the first real smile Margaret had seen on a stranger's face in longer than she could easily remember. Not the careful, complicated smile of someone managing discomfort, but a plain, simple, unguarded smile. "Yeah," he said. "She does. She got those from her mom." He said it easily and without self-pity, and then he got back in his car, and Margaret watched his taillights disappear around the corner, and she sat in the rain outside her building for another minute before going in. She didn't expect to see him again. That was not the kind of city story that had a sequel. You had a moment of crisis. Someone helped you. You thanked them and went back to your separate lives. And maybe you thought about it sometimes, Maybe it changed in some small way how you treated strangers, but it remained a closed chapter, except that Daniel Reeves worked for the city's water and sewer department. And as it happened, the city's water and sewer department had been assigned to repair a water main on Greenfield Avenue, 2 blocks from Margaret's apartment, starting the following Monday. And Daniel's route to and from the job site took him directly past her building. He saw her on Wednesday morning. She was outside, struggling with a bag of groceries balanced across her lap, while trying to pull open the building's front door, which had a heavy hydraulic closer that required significant force to operate against. He pulled over without thinking, jogged to the door, and held it open. She looked up and recognized him immediately, and something complicated moved across her face. Recognition, surprise, and what might have been an instinct of wariness that she then visibly chose to set aside. "The door is on the city's accessibility complaint list," she told him. "I know," he said. "I've actually seen the complaint. The building owner keeps contesting it." She paused. "You've seen it?" "I'm on a city maintenance crew. We cross-reference complaints sometimes." He shrugged. "I remember your street." She studied him. "The complaint was filed 14 months ago." His jaw tightened slightly. "I know. That's not okay. I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Are you busy? I was going to have coffee. I have actual good coffee, not the terrible stuff in the cafe on the corner." He glanced at his watch. His crew didn't start for 20 minutes. The job site was 8 minutes away. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I could do that." That first coffee lasted 45 minutes. He told her about his work, the way the city's infrastructure was held together with older repairs and chronic underfunding, and the genuine dedication of workers who cared about it anyway. She told him about her nonprofit work, the way she had found meaning in it even if it was not the work she had imagined for herself. They talked about Pittsburgh the way people who have chosen to stay in a place rather than been born there often talk about it, with a specific, earned affection. He told her about Lily easily, naturally, in the way of a parent for whom their child is simply the central fact of existence. Lily's mother had died of aggressive breast cancer when Lily was 2, and the details of this were delivered without drama and without self-pity, in the quiet way of something that had been profound and was now simply part of the architecture of who he was. Margaret told him about the accident. She told him the way she had learned to tell it, efficiently, without letting it become the whole story, because she had learned that if you let the accident become the whole story, that was all anyone would see. When he left for the job site, he paused in her doorway. "I'm going to be on that block for another 3 weeks," he said. "I drink terrible coffee from that cafe every morning, which I hate, but it's close. Would you want to do this again?" "You can't bring coffee from the terrible cafe to my place," she said. "I was not offering to do that." "Good." She was almost smiling. "Yes, I would want to do this again." And here is where I need to pause, because something was happening that neither of them was ready to name. Because the thing about 2 people who have each experienced loss, real loss, the kind that rewrites you, is that they recognize something in each other, not immediately, not consciously, but like a frequency that you can't quite hear but can feel in your chest. Daniel had spent 4 years being strong for Lily and competent at work and grateful for his neighbor Mrs. Patterson, and quietly, methodically lonely in the specific way that good people who are raising children alone are lonely, which is to say not dramatically, not in a way that calls attention to itself, but constantly, in the background, like a frequency. And Margaret had spent 3 years learning a new version of herself, building a new life out of different materials than she had planned, discovering that she was stronger than she had known, and also more tired than she had imagined. And she had built walls around certain things, not all things. She was not a closed person, but certain things, because the world had taught her that vulnerability in a wheelchair carried risks that vulnerability on 2 legs did not, that people made assumptions about what she could handle and what she deserved and who she was allowed to be. And she had learned to protect herself from those assumptions by not giving people the opportunity to make them. But here is what she had not counted on. She had not counted on a 7-year-old with rubber boots on the wrong feet and a travel-sized pack of wet wipes and a dinosaur Band-Aid and the straightforward, uncomplicated conviction that a person who was hurt deserved care. The following Wednesday, Daniel arrived for coffee, and Lily was with him. It was a school holiday, and his neighbor had a doctor's appointment, and he had called ahead to ask if it was okay, and Margaret had said yes. And now Lily stood in her living room looking at the wheelchair of the direct, curious attention of a child who has not yet been taught that looking directly is rude. "How does it go?" Lily asked. "Lily," Daniel said. "It's okay," Margaret said. "Come here. I'll show you." She spent 10 minutes explaining the basic mechanics of the wheelchair to Lily, who listened with total absorption and asked questions that were precise and practical and completely without pity, which is the only way children know how to ask questions when they haven't yet learned to be uncomfortable. She asked how Margaret pushed it. She asked what happened if it got stuck. She asked if Margaret ever went fast. That last question made Margaret laugh. A real laugh, the kind that surprised even her. "Sometimes," she said, "on hills." "That sounds fun," Lily said. "It kind of is," Margaret admitted. Lily nodded, as though this confirmed a theory she had been developing. Then she looked around the apartment with the frank assessment of a child conducting an inspection. "You have a lot of books," she said. "I love books. I love books, too. My dad reads to me every night. We're reading about a girl who finds a door in her house that leads somewhere magic." "I know that book," Margaret said. "I have it, actually. Do you want to see?" She rolled to her bookshelf. Lily followed, and Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway drinking coffee and watching his daughter climb onto the couch beside a woman she had just met and reach for the book with the comfortable ease of a child who has not yet learned to make love complicated. He thought about what Lily had said in the car that night. Love. Something could be completely around you all the time, and you might not even know it. He drank his coffee and said nothing. Weeks passed. The water main was repaired. The crew moved to a different block. Daniel began driving slightly out of his way to pass Margaret Street before his shift. He told himself this was because the traffic was better on that route, which was not true, and he was aware that it was not true, and he told himself the truth a few weeks later. Sitting in his car outside her building after they had had dinner together for the first time, Lily asleep in the back seat. He had feelings for her. This was inconvenient and complicated, and he had not planned it, and he had no idea what to do with it. Because his experience with women in the 4 years since Sarah's death had been limited and tentative, and he had always stepped back before anything became real, not because he didn't want real, but because the fear of it was large and his daughter was the most important thing in his world, and he did not want to introduce anything into Lily's life that might hurt her. Except, Lily was already attached. That was the thing. That had happened quietly, the way children attach, without announcement or ceremony. Lily talked about Margaret the way she talked about Mrs. Patterson and her teacher, Ms. Alvarez, with the comfortable possessiveness of someone who has decided that a person belongs to her. She had started asking to visit. She had asked if Margaret could come to her school concert. She had, on one occasion, asked her father, with the unfiltered candor that was her defining characteristic, "Dad, do you like Margaret like a friend or like more than a friend?" Daniel had said, "Where did you learn about more than a friend?" "Valentina in my class." Lily said, "Her parents are more than friends with each other. She says they kiss." "Margaret and I are friends," Daniel said. Lily looked at him with an expression that communicated, without words, that she considered this answer to be technically accurate, but fundamentally incomplete. Then she went back to her drawing. He told Margaret what Lily had asked. He told her on a Saturday afternoon when Lily was at a birthday party, and they were in her apartment, and they had been talking for 3 hours, and it was the kind of afternoon where the light changes and you don't notice because you're too busy talking. He told her because he didn't know what else to do with it, and because Margaret was, by this point, the person he talked about things he didn't know what to do with, which was itself a kind of answer to Lily's question. Margaret was quiet for a long time, long enough that he began to regret saying it. "Daniel," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly." "Okay." "I have had relationships since the accident," she said, in the direct, clear way she talked about hard things. "2. Both of them started with men who said that my disability didn't change anything for them, and both of them ended with me understanding that it changed everything for them. They just hadn't known how to say so at the beginning." One of them said, 8 months in, that he hadn't realized how limited our life would be. The other one, he was kind about it. He really was. But he said he was afraid he would eventually resent me, that caregiving wasn't what he'd signed up for, And I think he was trying to be honest and kind at the same time, and maybe succeeded, but it still felt like she stopped, looked at her hands, started again. I am a full person, she said. I'm not a project. I am not inspirational. I am not a burden. I am a 34-year-old woman who is smart and sometimes funny and very good at my job, and I read too many books, and I run too hot in summer, and I am genuinely difficult when I'm tired, and I am sometimes lonely, and I am more stubborn than anyone who knows me would recommend. That is who I am, and whoever is in my life has to know that, not theoretically. Actually, Daniel was quiet. Then he said, I know that. You think you know that. Margaret. He leaned forward. I have a 7-year-old daughter who gets up in the middle of the night sometimes and stands at my bedroom door and doesn't say anything. And when I ask her what's wrong, she says she just wanted to make sure I was there. I have been doing this alone for 4 years. I don't have room in my life for anything that isn't actual. I'm too tired for theoretical. He paused. I know who you are. I have been paying attention. She looked at him with that measuring, fierce look he had first seen on wet pavement in the rain. And then something in it shifted, the way a lock shifts when you find the right key, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to know it was open. But nothing good comes easily. And this is a part of the story where it gets harder before it gets better. Because 2 weeks after that conversation, something happened that Daniel did not see coming, and that Margaret had been quietly afraid of for months, and that would test everything. His sister called from Cleveland. Her name was Renee, and she had never quite approved of Daniel's choices. Not the city, not the night shift job, not the modest apartment, not the way he lived, which she described as surviving rather than thriving. She had a larger house and a husband with a management job, and she had been making, for years, a quiet and persistent case that Lily would be better off with her and her husband while Daniel got back on his feet, by which she meant while Daniel found a better job and a better apartment and a better life, as though the life he had was simply a temporary condition rather than the actual life he had chosen and built. She was coming to visit. She said this as though it were a kindness. She said she wanted to spend time with her niece, which was true, she did, but she also wanted to assess, and Daniel knew this, and knowing it made him tense in a way that he carried into work and into his apartment and into himself. He told Margaret about it. She listened. What are you afraid of? She asked. He was quiet. Then, slowly, that she'll look at my life and see all the things that aren't enough. The apartment, the job. There he stopped. She thinks I'm lonely. She thinks Lily needs more than I can give. What do you think? I think I'm doing my best. That's not the same thing as answer my question. He looked at her. Some days I think I'm enough, he said. Some days I'm not sure. Margaret nodded. Everyone who is doing their best has that same oscillation. The people who are always certain they're enough usually aren't paying enough attention. She paused. Do you want me to meet her? He looked surprised. My sister? Is that a crazy idea? He thought about it. It's a real idea. I don't know if it's the right time. Your call, she said simply. Renee arrived on a Friday and within 4 hours had cataloged, with the precision of someone who had been preparing her argument for years, the ways in which Daniel's life fell short of what she imagined for him. The apartment was small. The neighborhood was fine, but not excellent. The job was stable, but not advancing. She did not say any of this directly. Renee was not a direct person. She was a circling person, a suggesting person, have you thought about person? But the subtext was dense and Daniel heard every word of it. On Saturday, he brought Lily to Margaret's. He had not planned to have Renee come, but Lily, who had been told her aunt was visiting and that they were going to see Margaret and had apparently decided that these two facts were compatible, told her Aunt Renee at breakfast that they were going to visit her friend Margaret and that she should come because Margaret had good books and was funny. Renee came. What happened was not what Daniel expected. He had expected Renee to be polite and distant. He had expected her to look at Margaret's wheelchair and her modest apartment and mentally file them under evidence of something. He wasn't sure what, but something. He had expected to spend the afternoon managing. Instead, Renee sat at Margaret's kitchen table, and within 20 minutes they were talking about accessible design in public spaces, which was something Renee cared about because her mother-in-law used a walker and was constantly frustrated by the built environment, And Margaret was an efficient and well-informed explainer who made Renee feel smart by listening well, which is one of the great social skills, and Margaret had it. They talked for 90 minutes while Daniel made sandwiches, and Lily showed Renee the book she and Margaret were reading together, which they had been reading together every Saturday for 3 weeks. Lily picking up wherever they had left off, their two heads bent over the pages with the easy intimacy of a practice that had become ritual. Renee pulled Daniel aside in the kitchen when Margaret was in the other room with Lily. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before, something less certain than her usual certainty. "She's remarkable," Renee said. "I know." "Daniel." She looked at him carefully. "Don't mess this up." He blinked. He had been braced for a different sentence. "I wasn't planning to." "Good." She looked back toward the living room, where they could hear Lily asking Margaret to read aloud the part about the girl opening the magic door. "Lily talks about her all the time. I thought it was just—" She paused. "I thought it was just a phase. But listening to her now, that kid loves her. She genuinely loves her." "Yeah," Daniel said quietly. "Yeah, she does." Renee looked at him. "And you?" He said nothing. He didn't need to. The city finally responded to the accessibility complaint about Margaret's building door. This was not poetic coincidence. It was a result of Margaret, the week after the attack, filing a formal legal complaint through a disability rights organization she had been connected with through her support group, a complaint that named the building owner, cited specific city ordinances, and referenced a 14-month delay on the initial report. The legal pressure worked in the way legal pressure usually works. Not immediately, but eventually. They gave the building owner 60 days. The building owner was a man named Gerard Polly, 62, who owned 4 properties in Greenfield, and who had managed his buildings with a philosophy that the minimum investment required to avoid legal consequences was a correct investment. He was not evil. He was simply a certain kind of person who prioritized his own convenience above other people's dignity and had never been sufficiently inconvenienced to change. He had the door mechanism replaced in 45 days, 3 days after his second formal notice. He also, as part of the same agreement, had the broken section of sidewalk in front of the building repaired and added a small overhang over the front entrance that had been a hazard in rain. These were not generous acts. They were legally compelled acts. But Margaret stood outside her building on the afternoon. The new door was installed and pressed the automatic opener button, and watched the door swing wide and smooth and easy, and she thought about 14 months and all the time she had to work around that door or wait for someone to open it or simply not leave at some point because the weight of managing it was more than she had to give that day, and she felt something that wasn't quite triumph but was adjacent to it. She called Daniel on her way back upstairs. He picked up on the second ring. "They fixed my door," she said. "I heard. The work order went through our office. You put something on it, didn't you?" A pause. "I may have noted it internally as a priority referral." "Daniel." "Margaret." "Thank you," she said. And then, because she had been thinking about it for days, and she was a person who said true things when she was ready to say them, "I think I might be falling in love with you. I don't want to make this awkward, but I thought you should know." The silence on the line was long enough that she second-guessed herself, ran rapidly through the conversation she'd just had with herself about being direct and honest, and not protective of things that deserved to be said out loud. Then he said, his voice low and careful, "I was going to tell you the same thing this weekend. I had a plan for it and everything." She laughed. "What was the plan?" It was a better plan than what you just did, honestly." "Tell me the plan." "Now it seems unnecessary." "Daniel, tell me the plan." He sighed. "I was going to take you to the park by the river, the one with the accessible path. I was going to bring Lily, and she had agreed to be involved in a certain capacity." "Your 7-year-old was part of your romantic plan?" She was enthusiastic. "You know how she is." Margaret was laughing in a way she hadn't laughed in longer than she could remember. It didn't hurt, and it didn't feel dangerous, and it felt exactly like what it was, which was joy, simple and unearned and completely actual. "We can still go to the park," she said. "Yeah. Yes. But the declaration stands." "Yeah," he said softly. "The declaration stands. But I told you this story was going to test them, and I have not yet told you the hardest part. And here it is." 2 months later, Daniel was at work when his phone rang. The number was Lily's school. He stepped away from the crew and answered, and the school nurse told him that Lily had a fall during recess and hit her head on the asphalt and that she was conscious and responsive, but they needed him to come in and they recommended she see a doctor. He was at the school in 12 minutes. Lily had a small cut on her forehead from the fall and a moderate concussion, which the emergency room confirmed that afternoon. She was told to rest for a week, no screens, limited activity. She was also, when Daniel sat beside her hospital bed and looked at her small pale face with a bandage on her forehead, more frightened than he had ever seen her. Not of the injury. Lily was not afraid of pain. She was pragmatic about it the way she was pragmatic about most things. She was afraid of something else. "Dad," she said, "when I fell, for a second I thought..." She stopped. "What bug?" "I thought I might not get up." She said it with the measured honesty of a child who had been thinking carefully about something and has decided to say it anyway. Like, "Mama." She fell down and didn't get up. Daniel's chest tightened so hard it was physical. Sarah had not died of a fall. She had died in a hospital bed, the cancer making its final comprehensive argument. But in Lily's 7-year-old understanding, the metaphor of falling and not getting up was how she had organized the incomprehensible fact of her mother's death. And she had never said this out loud before, had never connected her own fear so directly to her grief. He took her hand. He didn't say "you're fine," or "you're not like Mama," or any of the technically true but emotionally inadequate things you could say. He said, "I know, Bug. I know that's a scary thing to feel." She looked at him. "Are you scared of things?" "Yes." "Of what?" He thought about the true answer, the honest answer, the one that a 7-year-old might not fully understand, but that she would feel the truth of, which was worth more than a perfectly understood explanation. "Of losing people I love," he said. "Same as you." She was quiet. "Like Margaret?" "Like you," he said, "and like Margaret." She considered this for a long time. Then she asked if Margaret could come. He texted Margaret from the hospital room. He told her what had happened, and that Lily was okay, but that she was asking for her. He added, "You don't have to come, we'll be home tonight." She replied before he finished typing, "I'm on my way." She arrived 40 minutes later. She had taken 2 buses and navigated the hospital entrance ramp, which was technically accessible but had the kind of automatic door timing that made it functionally difficult. And she had done all of this without asking anyone for help because she hadn't wanted to wait. When she came through the door of Lily's room, slightly damp from the October rain that was coming down again, Lily looked at her from the hospital bed with a bandage on her forehead and said, "You came." "Of course I came," Margaret said, and she said in the tone of someone for whom this was simply obvious, for whom there was never another answer, and she brought her chair close to the bed and took Lily's hand, and for a moment no one said anything, and it was the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Daniel stood by the window. He watched the 2 of them, his daughter and this woman who had come into their lives from a wet pavement in the rain, and felt something settle in him, something that had been unsettled for so long he had forgotten what settle felt like. Lily healed quickly, as children do. Within a week she was entirely herself, which is to say she was asking questions at a rate that made her teacher check in with Daniel about her, and telling her classmates about her time in the hospital with the exaggerated detail of a natural storyteller, and asking Margaret if they could read the next 2 chapters because she had been resting and thinking about the story, and she had a theory about the magic door. Life settled into a shape that none of them had planned. Daniel spent 3 evenings a week with Margaret, sometimes with Lily, sometimes not. They went to the accessible trail along the river on Saturdays when the weather allowed. They argued about movies and agreed about books and disagreed about the best way to make rice. Lily taught Margaret a card game she had invented herself, which had rules that changed unpredictably and that Margaret accused of being rigged, and that Lily insisted were perfectly fair with an expression that strongly suggested they were not. Margaret's work at the nonprofit expanded. She had been writing about disability and accessibility for their blog for 2 years, and an editor at a Pittsburgh magazine reached out in November asking if she would be interested in writing a regular column. She said yes. The first column was about the water main complaint that had taken 14 months. The second was about the automatic door. The third was about what it means to ask for help and what it means to be helped well. That third column was read by 40,000 people in the first week, and the comments section was full of people who recognized themselves in it, who had been on one side of that transaction or the other, who had helped clumsily or received help badly or given help that was refused and not understood why. She called Daniel to tell him about the column going viral, and he said, "I knew you were a good writer. You haven't read most of what I write." "I read all of it," he said. She was quiet. "You do?" "I subscribed to the newsletter in September. Don't make it weird." In December, Lily asked Margaret to come to her school concert. This was not a casual invitation. Lily had been preparing for the concert for 6 weeks. She had a speaking part in addition to the singing, and the significance of the invitation was apparent from the way she delivered it. Sitting across from Margaret at the kitchen table with her hands folded and her expression one of careful seriousness. "I would love to come," Margaret said. "You have to tell me if you can get to the auditorium okay," Lily said. "Because I asked my teacher and she said there's a special section for wheelchairs, but I want to make sure it's actually accessible and not just what they think is accessible, because sometimes those are different." Margaret stared at her. 7 years old. "Where did you learn that?" "From your column," Lily said simply. "Dad reads it to me." The concert was in the second week of December, a Thursday evening, cold enough that your breath made clouds in the air. Daniel pushed a stroller he had borrowed from a neighbor to block the aisle space next to a row of seats, creating a natural spot for Margaret's chair to pull alongside. Lily had checked that this was done during the afternoon and had nodded her approval. The speaking part Lily had was 2 lines, but she delivered them with the total commitment of someone who believed that every word mattered, her voice clear and carrying, her face completely unself-conscious. Afterward, in the hallway outside the auditorium, Lily in her good dress with her hair in 2 braids, she found in the crowd and went directly to Margaret and said, "Did you hear me?" "I heard every word," Margaret said. "I wasn't nervous," Lily said. "I could tell." "Dad was nervous," Lily said. "I was not nervous," Daniel said. "He cried." Lily told Margaret confidentially. "I did not cry. His eyes got red," Lily clarified, as though this were legally distinct from crying. Margaret looked at Daniel. "It's okay," she said. "I also had something in my eye." He laughed and she laughed, and Lily looked between them with the expression she wore when she was pleased with an outcome she had quietly been working toward. And if she had been the kind of child who said, "I told you," so she would have said it, but she wasn't. She was a better person than that. So instead, she took one of each of their hands, and they walked out into the December night together, Lily's boots, correctly on the right feet, clicking on the tile. On Christmas Eve, Daniel stood in Margaret's kitchen, making the kind of disaster of a pie crust that made her laugh out loud while directing him with the authority of someone who grew up making pastry every December. Lily was asleep in the second bedroom, the room Margaret had quietly cleared of boxes over the past 2 months, put a proper bed and a nightstand in, strung lights along the window frame that Lily had chosen from a catalog with the gravity of an interior designer. The apartment smelled like pie and wood smoke from a candle Margaret loved, and the particular smell of December in a warm room when it's cold outside. Through the window, the city held the specific quiet of Christmas Eve, the ordinary becoming briefly ceremonial. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel said, not looking up from his pastry disaster. "You can tell me anything," Margaret said. "When I took that wrong turn," he said, "that night, I've thought about it a lot. About how close I was to taking the right turn. I think about it too. I almost went left. I almost went the whole right way home." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad I went wrong." Margaret looked at him from across the kitchen, at this man who had held her wheelchair steady on wet pavement and told her she was safe, who read her newsletter because he wanted to understand her world, who had a daughter with boots on the wrong feet and a theory about love being invisible like water, who was making a complete wreck of her pie crust with enormous earnest effort. "So am I," she said. Spring came, and with it the small, persistent victories that make up a life. The building owner, prompted by a second legal inquiry and the public attention brought by Margaret's column, conducted a comprehensive accessibility review of all 4 of his properties. He was not transformed into a good person. That is not how people usually change. But he hired a consultant and made improvements and stopped contesting complaints, which was enough to matter even if it was enough to be inspiring. Margaret began speaking at city council meetings about accessibility in public infrastructure. She was precise and well-prepared and impossible to dismiss, and she made allies on the council who were genuinely convinced and made more who were simply convinced that she would not go away, which produces the same policy results even if it's a different kind of persuasion. Daniel got a promotion at the water department that moved him to a day's shift position with more responsibility and modestly better pay. He was not sure he wanted the promotion at first, because the night shift had become the architecture around which his life was built, and rebuilding the architecture required rebuilding everything else. But Lily said, "Dad, if you work days, we can have dinner together every night," in the tone of someone who had thought about this seriously and arrived at the obvious conclusion, and so he took the promotion. They found a Saturday farmers market that had excellent accessible pathways and reliably decent coffee, and was run by a rotating cast of farmers from the surrounding counties, and they went most Saturdays through the spring and summer, the three of them in a kind of comfortable ease that domesticity builds over time, the ease of knowing what the other person will order, and which vendor has the best apples, and what Lily will ask a vendor about the chickens every single week as though the information might have changed. And here is where I want to slow down, because I think there is something important to say about what this story is actually about. Not about the attack on Mercer Street, though that was where it began. Not about Daniel's wrong turn, though that was the hinge. Not even about the love that grew in the kitchen over disastrous pie crusts and the space beside a hospital bed and long afternoons of conversation. What this story is about is what happens when you take ordinary people, not heroes, not saints, not people who have everything figured out, and give them one genuine moment of choosing the harder right thing over the easier comfortable thing. Daniel could have driven past. He had a child in the car and a long shift behind him and no obvious reason to stop. Margaret could close herself off, as she had every right to do after everything she had been through. She could have thanked him and moved on, kept the walls up, let it be what the city usually let it be, a transaction with a stranger that ended when the stranger left. But they didn't. They chose, each in their way, to remain in the story, to let one another in past the obvious stopping point, to stay when staying was harder and more uncertain than going. That is the whole of it. That is what I want you to carry out of this story and into your week and into your year and into the ordinary moments of your own life. Not the grand sweep of fate or the poetry of wrong turns or the particular and specific miracle of a child with boots on the wrong feet offering a dinosaur Band-Aid, but the small, daily choice that all of it rested on, the choice to stay. 1 year after the night on Mercer Street, Margaret wrote a column. She didn't tell Daniel she was writing it. She submitted it to the magazine, and it ran on a Thursday morning, and she sent him a link with a text that said only, "Don't make it weird." He read it at his desk. His colleague noticed him go quiet and asked if everything was okay. He said yes, everything was okay. He just needed a minute. He took the minute. The column was not about him. Exactly. It was about the question of what it means to be seen. She wrote about what it feels like to navigate a world that was built without you in mind, that expects you to be grateful for the minimum, that finds your presence in certain spaces surprising or inconvenient. She wrote about the specific loneliness of that, and then she wrote about what it feels like when someone simply pays attention, not in an intrusive, hovering way of people who manage their discomfort through excessive helpfulness, but in the quiet, steady way of someone who has decided to understand, who reads your newsletter and asks real questions and holds a wheelchair steady when the moment calls for it, who does not require you to be extraordinary to justify your presence. I have spent 3 years, she wrote, learning how to live in a world that was not built for me. And the thing I have learned, the thing I did not expect to learn, the thing that surprised me, is that the world is also full of people who are willing to rebuild it. Not governments, not policies, though those matter. People, individual people, making individual choices, one moment at a time. A man who takes a wrong turn. A little girl with a dinosaur Band-Aid. A neighbor who stays late. A friend who shows up. These are not small things. I have been inside the moment when someone chose to see me, and it was not small. It was everything. Daniel texted her back. It's already weird. Then, I'm proud of you. Then, a minute later, Lily is going to read this one out loud. She replied, I know. I wrote it for both of you. They did not have a dramatic ending. Life rarely does. What they had was a Sunday in late October, exactly 1 year after Mercer Street. The three of them at the river trail where the leaves had turned their aggressive autumn colors and were coming down in loose spirals in the kind of wind that feels like the year is taking a breath before winter. Lily ran ahead, her coat half buttoned, her voice thrown back at them on the wind, asking them to please hurry because there was something up there that she needed to show them. Daniel walked alongside Margaret at the pace the trail required, his hands in his pockets, the quiet between them the specific quiet of people who no longer need to feel it. What do you think she wants to show us? Margaret asked. She found a dog last week and tried to convince me it followed her home, Daniel said, that she had no control over it. She's very persuasive. She's terrifying, he said, with the pure pride of a parent who means the opposite. Ahead of them, Lily turned and waved extravagantly, impatient with their pace. Coming, Margaret called, and she picked up speed and Daniel jogged slightly to stay alongside, and ahead of them Lily laughed at something, the sound bright and immediate and gone on the wind, and in the moment between her laughter and their arrival at wherever she needed to take them, which was probably just a particularly good leaf or a duck or a cloud that looked like something the world was ordinary and sufficient, and theirs. I began this story with a woman on wet pavement in the dark, saying the most frightening words she had ever said. I want to end it with her on a trail in the October light, moving toward a laughing child and the sound of the river and an ordinary Sunday that held, the way ordinary Sundays always hold when you are paying attention, everything that matters. We spend so much of our lives waiting for the extraordinary, the right moment, the right circumstances, the grand gesture that will change everything. But here is what this story asks you to consider. Here is what Margaret and Daniel and a 7-year-old girl named Lily, with her boots on the wrong feet and her dinosaur Band-Aids and her questions about fish and water, want to leave you with. The extraordinary is almost never what you were expecting. It is almost always hiding inside something that looked, from a distance, like an ordinary wrong turn, a small kindness, a door held open, a chair steadied in the rain. Pay attention to the small moments. Stay when it would be easier to go. See the people around you. Actually see them, the full, complicated, fierce, remarkable people they are, and let them see you in return. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If this story reached something true in you today, if you saw yourself somewhere in Margaret's courage or Daniel's steadiness or Lily's uncomplicated love, please take a second and hit the like button below and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next story. These stories exist because you are here to receive them. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know.